Hello, YouTube. Let me tell you an interesting episode from the history of exploration of outer space by human beings, and maybe not only the human beings. On August 11, 1969, the dummy you see in the photos for this video, the dummy was similar to Soviet cosmonaut, who was the first human in space, Yuri Gagarin. Well, this dummy traveled on a low-level flight, 1,980 kilometers, over the far side of the moon. Along with the lunar or moonwalker lunar vehicle, it was the highest achievement of the Soviet lunar program in the years 1964 to 1974. At first, the USSR even was the first in certain areas in the lunar race with the United States. For example, in September 1968, it was aboard the Soviet ship 7K-L1, number 11, or Zond 5, that living creatures flew around the moon and returned to Earth. Two Central Asian turtles who were accompanied by Drosophila flies, mealworms, and E. coli. All of them returned in good health, so to say. But how the human body would tolerate the radiation of deep space had yet to be studied. Different types of radiation interact with the human body in different ways. Some stop in the surface layers of the skin, leaving all their energy there. Others waste it gradually. Others, passing through the body, evenly irradiate its parts. Therefore, for accurate measurements at the Institute of Biomedical Problems of the USSR Academy of Sciences, a full-size replica of a human being was built, and it was filled with sensors. The mannequin looked like a human, not only in appearance. The material from which it was made corresponded in density to the tissues of the human body. With the help of such mannequins or dummies, they're also called phantoms, the effects of cosmic radiation on the body of astronauts and cosmonauts are studied. Not everyone knows about this, but the first biped in outer space was not Yuri Gagarin at all, but Ivan Ivanovich. That's what rocket engineers call the dummy, which flew on a test flight on March 25, 1961. Ivan Ivanovich became the so-called zero cosmonaut, using the example of which scientists for the first time assessed the impact of space flight on the human body. The phantom mannequin from the collection of the Polytechnic Museum in the modern Russia was no longer given a human name. The FM-2 or FM2 is a later and more complex model. It was developed in 1968 at the Institute of Biomedical Problems. The main task of FM2 was to determine the degree of exposure to cosmic radiation on the body. There are 20 cavities in the mannequin's body that mimic vital organs. A dosimeter is installed in each of them. The body is made of special materials in terms of density and ability to transmit ionizing radiation. It is similar to human tissues. To achieve such parameters, scientists had to add sawdust and wheat grains to the polymer resin. This phantom has flown into space twice. For the first time in 1969, aboard the Zond 7 spacecraft. The Soviet Union was seriously preparing for the manned lunar expedition, so the probe, in addition to filming the far side of the moon, was assigned another important task: to collect data on the risks of harmful effects of radiation on cosmonauts during such a long flight. The Phantom returned to Earth with invaluable information. Well, it was never useful to the USSR. The second FM2 expedition took place a year later. You see, the then French President Georges Pompidou arrived in the USSR, and they decided to show him the launch of some kind of spacecraft. Manned flights were not planned in those days, so a mannequin sat in the cosmonaut's chair. Pompidou, as the engineers jokingly nicknamed the device, flew into orbit and returned with the Phantom intact. Despite the fact that the phenomenon of cosmic radiation has been studied, and trust me, not completely, you can see it in my other videos about dangers of spaceflight, those phantoms still fly into space. Some of them, for example, the German Rand, also look like a human being. The German Phantom even uses a real human skeleton, but the Russian space agency Roscosmos refused such an arrangement. Modern Russian Phantoms are spherical. There is now no grain in the shell material, and instead of epoxy resin, a more technologically advanced and modern polyurethane is used. The weight was 70 kilograms and the height of that mannequin 170 centimeters. The material of manufacture similar in composition to biological tissue and capable of withstanding overloads. Epoxy resin plus wheat grains. I want to give you a little bit more details about this achievement. Arms and legs were on hinges. It did look like Yuri Gagarin. It was a joke of the scientists. The official name of that Gagarin, who was clad in fabric equivalent to Phantom mannequin, we already know it was FM2. So on August 8, 1969, the Zone 7 station with a dummy on board launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome, having successfully rounded the moon on August 11. And the spacecraft performed 2 sessions of photographing the satellite of our planet, and it landed on August 14 in a special area south of Kostanay in Kazakhstan. Footage from those filming decorated a block of stamps, so to say, of the USSR post office, and it can still be purchased online flea markets. The conclusion of experts based on the results of the FM1 expedition, well, was as follows. Radiations on the Earth-Moon highway is not terrible for the human body, provided that there was no solar flare at the time of the flight, and such outbreaks can still be predicted only 1 to 3 days before the event. It turns out that the words of the experts can be translated more or less like this: everything will be fine if you're lucky. In 1970, the FM2 once again flew into Earth orbit for scientific purposes, as they described it, after which he, or it, I should say, retired to the Moscow Polytechnic Museum. And the real Soviet man, the real human being, never got to the moon. The space designer, Sergei Korolev, the father of the Soviet space exploration, died, and there was not enough money to continue. The same Zone 7 was the fourth lunar spacecraft that tried to take off with this number. The previous 3 sevens exploded right at the start. And then, of course, the fact that on July 20, 1969, even before the FM2 expedition, American astronaut Neil Armstrong landed on the surface of the moon. Well, it's a fact to me. Some people don't believe it, but I'm not going to go into this here again. The thing is that the USSR lost the political race to the moon, and there was no practical sense in these flights. But it was history, and that's what I wanted to let you know today. I'll bring you more interesting stories about space exploration in the future. If you like my research, please support me through the links you'll find in the description to this video. Thank you for your attention to my work. Please tell others.